Okay. So, first episode of the Cheech and Manny music show. I got
Yes,
my
yes,
friend
indeed.
here, my co-host Cheech. Cheech,
Yep.
want to say a few words?
How's it going, Manny? How are you?
Pretty good, brother. Rocking it here from Antigua, Guatemala.
Man, looks beautiful. I'm rocking it from my room.
Yes, sir.
But
Okay. So,
so yeah,
so
go
first
ahead.
episode, we're gonna be talking about the new wave of British heavy metal, right?
Definitely. Yep.
And just to start us off, I guess what is the new wave? The new wave of British heavy metal, like exactly what is it?
Well, in my opinion, the new wave of British heavy metal is a movement that started out of England, especially London, of a bunch of bands that were creating a new sound, a heavy sound. Mainly out of the East End of London, like where Maiden was from, and
Mhm.
other parts of London. And they added elements of punk, heavy metal, like Judas Priest heavy metal,
Mhm.
classic rock like Zeppelin, Thin Lizzy, UFO. But yet they created their own thing with this young, powerful angst that they had because they were all young guys coming right out of high school with not much going for them,
Mhm.
because of the economy of England, of London, especially in that time.
I'm gonna
And
say
it
that's
was like,
and that's really important to know because I feel like it's a callback to the early days of metal in the 1970s. Like there seems like
yeah,
Black Sabbath, like these people that these musicians that came out and created metal came from this
mhm.
low working class family. Not
Oh
low
yeah,
working class situations.
exactly.
A lot of them were
I think,
factory workers.
yeah, factory workers, people like Ozzy worked in slaughterhouses and criminals. Ozzy was a burglar at one time. So like, if you didn't have money, there wasn't much going on,
Yeah.
and there was a big music scene. So they just formed bands. So it goes, yeah, you're right. It goes back to the Zeppelin, the Deep Purple, and the Sabbath era. And then these kids were influenced also by punk.
That's important.
And I call them kids. I mean, like, like Steve Harris was like, you know, in 1975, he was a kid when he formed Iron Maiden, like just out of high school, like 18, 19 years old.
Crazy.
You know, and they basically took that drive, that influence, and punk was going on, and punk had a huge influence on these bands for attitude. A lot of people, like Brian Tadler from Diamond Head, he
Oh
will
yeah.
admit
Sure.
that he liked punk, that
Hmm.
that had a huge influence on Diamond Head.
Yep.
uh, and of course, the classic bands that were out there already, like I mentioned earlier, Thin Lizzy, UFO, um, Judas Priest, so ahead of the times. And we talked about
So
the other one, Scorpions. So there was metal, like going on, actual heavy metal band. You listen to
right,
that stuff, it's heavy as shit.
right.
Um, so they took that, and then the angst of not having a future for a lot of these kids,
Yep. Yep.
either working in the factory where the father worked, the grandfather worked, probably the
Yep.
great grandfather,
Yep.
and just forming a band with the hopes of getting a gig and playing a pub or something. And a lot of them weren't doing covers. They were writing their own music. That's the key. They
Mhm.
were writing their own music.
That's
And
key.
the interesting thing is every band is so different sounding from each other.
That's a good point.
You know, like the main ones that I want to talk about today, like like Diamond Head compared to Tigers of Pantang,
Mhm.
compared to Iron Maiden, they're all different. Like Tigers of
Completely agree.
Pantang sound like Kiss. You know, Def Leppard wanted to sound more American,
Mhm.
almost corporate rock.
They
Mate,
succeeded.
and they did. Oh, that was
They,
their
I won't
goal.
lie to you, Def Leppard. Listen, they get a lot. They sometimes get plugged in with the hair metal scene, the American hair
Yeah,
metal scene, but that's kind of like far from the truth. In
yeah,
actuality, they were part of the new wave of British heavy metal, but bringing
and
wanted to be more
yeah.
American sounding.
Oh yeah. and they were literally kids like when they got signed. They were like 17. Rick Allen was 15 years old when he joined Def Leppard. So
Wow.
they were like, right out of high school, but they were from Sheffield. So, you know, I don't know if it doesn't really matter. England is England, but like they would probably, from Sheffield travel to London because that was where all the clubs were.
Right,
I,
right.
I think the main ones, and these were the first four ones that to get signed.
Right.
We had said Def Leppard, Iron Maiden,
Mm-hmm.
and Zaxxon.
Mm-hmm.
Priest was already signed, but they were a huge influence
Right, right.
on that whole thing. Zaxxon is different because they're from Yorkshire,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know if that's way far from like London, but they got big over there as well, and it all goes down to the guy who started it, in my opinion, is Neil Kay, who
That's really important.
he started the Bandwagon Club,
Right.
probably like in '75, and then it didn't really get big until '77, '78. And I think what he was doing was bands would come with their demo tapes,
Mm-hmm.
and he would play the local bands. He would play Iron Maiden, and he would play Diamond Head and Tigers of Pantang, Zaxxon, and then as well as Rush, Ted Nugent, all
Right,
these bands
right.
that were popular at the time. It was a place for kids to go and hang out, and they even had, it's funny if you go on YouTube, air guitar, like guys would go up and play air guitar contests. And then he took those demos, and the kids would get into these bands, and then he took those bands in the studio. It's have somewhere in my notes. I think he took bands like Zaxxon, Praying Mantis, and Maiden in
Mm-hmm.
the studio, and he got them signed to what was it, BMI, and then he put out a compilation called Metal for Your Mothers,
Mm-hmm.
which was all these bands that were out there. So he's the key maker, and he was connected to this what was it, a Sounds magazine,
Mm.
which was like a big magazine that promoted all the bands, promoted the bandwagon, and got the scene going. And these kids, that they followed these bands religiously. You could
I'm
look
glad they
at,
created that cult following, right? Like from
oh
especially
yeah, I think Neil Kay made that happen. Without having the bandwagon, that's where all the bands went. Oh, and he also set up concerts. So
mm.
you would see, maybe not at the bandwagon, but Iron Maiden would play with Samson, which was
Mm.
Dickinson's first band together. Or you would see Diamond Head play with Tigers of Pantang. So he set
Right.
up concerts, for the kids to see. And then the big concert, I think that really where is it? That got the new wave of British heavy metal really going was the Reading Festival,
Mm-hmm.
1980. I
Yeah.
mean, Iron Maiden, Def Leppard, Praying Mantis, who was a big new wave of British heavy metal band.
Mm-hmm.
Those and Tigers of Pantang, in a funny band called Girl, and that happens to have Phil Collin from Def Leppard. He was in that band. He
Mm-hmm.
replaced Pete Willis later on. We talked about Ozzy being on that bill, but he canceled for some
Mm.
reason. And then the main headliners were Whitesnake, Rory Gallagher, and UFO. So that was a huge thing for those
Huge.
bands to get out there. So yeah.
Huge. So I think so we can kind of see the formation of the scene, right? Like
Yep.
and getting it geared up for the explosion that's gonna come. And I
Oh
think
yeah.
you said the Reading Festival, right?
Yeah, the Reading
Yeah.
Festival.
I think that's the key to this whole thing.
Oh yeah, that was, I don't know if it was
It's like
before
a who's
Monsters
who of metal bands.
of new wave of British heavy
New
metal.
wave
Yeah,
of
then
British
there
heavy
was
metal.
there was another one, the Monsters of Rock, that was a
I heard of that one.
huge festival.
I heard of that
that
one.
I think Neil Kay hosted. He was the
Right.
MC in that. And that might have been a little bit later
Right.
when the bands got popular. But now, and then another issue that was going on was the whole, economic depression
Hmm.
went on in England. Then
Hmm.
Margaret Thatcher took over in '79.
Right.
I don't know a lot about English, politics, but I just know a lot of the not middle class, the poor
Yeah, there was a
were
lot of
angry.
poverty in that time.
Yeah, wasn't much going on. I mean, Maiden had album covers with Margaret Thatcher walking and Eddie hiding behind a wall with a knife. So what does it mean? You know what I mean?
And when it's
Yeah,
interesting because Margaret Thatcher, did she represent like the conservative party? Is that what was going on? And I
I
guess
think so. I don't
maybe
know
similar
enough.
to Ronald Reagan here in the States, where she probably had some version of Reaganomics, like trickling down, but in
Yeah,
actuality, it wasn't trickling down, and there was actually a lot of poverty. And you'd be surprised, right? I was like, wait, what?
yeah. Oh yeah, I think she took away bread or something from like
Yeah.
kids' lunch in school, so kind of like what
No,
Reagan did, you know,
yeah, no,
tomatoes.
no. And
Yeah,
the Sex Pistols have the song "God Save the Queen," where
yeah,
the punks hated Margaret Thatcher. They
yeah,
hated
yeah,
the establishment. They hated the establishment. I think
yeah.
going back to what we said about the new wave of British heavy metal getting its influences from the punk scene, right? I think
Mhm.
politically it carried over as well,
Oh yeah, yeah,
right?
definitely.
So especially like bands like the Sex Pistols were making controversial songs about, screw the
Oh,
Queen while everybody was idolizing the Queen. Sex Pistols
hmm
were saying, screw her, God,
oh
let's hang her.
yeah. I mean, the Sex Pistols definitely had a huge influence on some of these bands. I think, Iron Maiden. Steve Harris always,
The
says he hated
speed.
punk. Oh, the Speed, definitely the
I'll
Speed
be
part of
honest
it.
with you. I know Steve Harris has his opinions on punk, but
Yeah.
when you put on the Sex Pistols record and you hear, how fast they're playing those riffs, easily saw that carried over to the new wave of British heavy metal, which I think that's a defining thing about it, the speed. That
Yeah.
Judas Priest was also starting to, you know,
That's true because bands were fast. Like there are some Thin Lizzy songs that are pretty fast or
they're
metal.
a prototype, like way ahead of
Oh,
their time.
oh yeah. Thin Lizzy was definitely the band that influenced most of them because of the not only because of the fastness, but the twin guitars.
Yeah.
That's something
Yeah.
to consider. Most
Yeah.
of these bands had two guitar players, and they used harmonies.
Right.
That goes back to Priest too. But there was a band prior to that named Wishbone Ash,
Hmm.
and they started that sound that like twin guitar harmony. I know
Right.
Steve Harris talks about them all the time as a big influence. And if you listen to a song called The Phoenix,
Hmm.
it's total Maiden. You can hear where Harris was,
Hmm.
getting his influences from. So I think, that being said, they took a lot from all that stuff, the twin guitars, the speed,
Right.
but yet they made it their own. They made it their own sound.
For sure.
I mean, if you want, we could talk a little bit about some of the bands. I made a list that maybe our viewers would want to check out. These are my favorites. So these are some of the new wave of British heavy metal bands
Hmm.
that I think are the most important ones. Angel Witch, Iron Maiden, number
Hmm.
one, in my opinion. I should have put that first.
Well, pause right there. I was listening to Iron Maiden 1. Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
This record is so amazing. For all the younger listeners out there, do yourself a favor. You need to listen to Iron Maiden 1. Like it is like
exactly.
it is one of these records that, first of all, from the artwork, it's
Oh
pretty
God,
amazing.
that's why I bought it when I was a kid for the artwork. I
Dude,
remember I bought the Grateful Dead set and Iron Maiden's first album
yeah.
just because it looked cool. Actually, because the back of it, the guys in Iron Maiden looked cool, and I'm like, I want to look like those guys.
Yeah.
And then I put Maiden's first album on, and it was the first track was a Running Free. I don't even remember. No, Saint. Oh God, what is this song?
And pull it up.
Prowler. I
Yep,
think it was
yep,
Prowler.
yep.
The Prowler, and you're like, oh my God, blew my mind away from the beginning
Um,
to the end. Then I put Dead Set on by the
so
Grateful Dead. and I was like,
Right.
what the fuck? You know, not dissing the Grateful Dead, but
No,
you
no,
know,
no. It's black and like it's night and day because there's
yeah,
nothing like it. And yeah, Prowler. Um, I think this record has Phantom of the Opera.
yep, which is probably the one of the greatest heavy metal masterpieces
Whew.
ever recorded, ever recorded. And to mention, this is an important thing. We talked about this too. Martin Birch, he wasn't on the first Maiden, but
Mhm.
he was on, I think he came in on Killers. He produced Deep Purple. He produced Machine Head and
There you
on all the
go.
Purple albums. So Martin Birch came in and took Maiden under, his wings, and he helped them create the sound. Same way Terry Brown did with Rush, because
Exactly.
you need
Producers
that
are
producer.
key. I
You
think
need that.
that's something that I'll be honest with you, I think that's something lacking today. Like, don't get me wrong, there are producers out
Yeah,
there. You know, you have your like I guess if we talk quickly outside genres, like you have your Dr. Dre's.
yeah,
Um, these are guys that they have sounds and producers, but before social media, before computers, the producer
yeah.
was key. Like George Martin with the Beatles.
That's a great
Now,
example.
without George
Yeah.
Martin, without these producers, I don't think these bands would have achieved their iconic sound.
No, because they needed to get the best out of them,
Yeah.
And then you could take Mutt Lang, what he did for Def Leppard. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
probably Pyromania, you know, what an album, what a production,
Yeah.
amazing. And that was all Mutt Lang on the production,
Yep.
you know.
Yep. Mutt
He
Lang.
might have produced he might have produced High and Dry. I'm not sure, but I know Pyromania. He took them to the next level of.
Oh yeah. Mutt Lang. Oh my goodness. Even with like his work with AC/DC.
That's right. Yeah,
I'll be
yeah.
honest
Going
with you,
back.
the moment they worked with Mutt Lang, they exploded. Like he knew how to
Yeah.
capture their sound.
And that's another band we forgot about that was out there because
I was gonna say
ACDC.
AC/DC. Let's quick blurb because I know they're from
Yeah,
Australia. So I don't
yeah,
think they do get, don't get me wrong, they're famous, they're worldwide, their
yeah,
band logo is iconic, but I don't
yeah.
think they get the proper due and their influence because they were crunching riffs.
Oh yeah,
No,
they were rock and roll, man. They had almost like that old school rock and roll, and they
I was
made
gonna
it heavy.
say
And
exactly.
the genius behind the band, everyone's Angus is Malcolm Young because he wrote the
Oh,
song.
I will tell you right now, Malcolm Young, I, just before when I discovered the band, I saw Angus, right? He's crazy in like the best way possible. But it was
Yeah.
not, I
Oh, that
noticed
was the thing. Yeah, he was the
yeah,
whole show.
he was the whole show. He was like the Chuck Berry. Like he invented his
That
own, like
exactly.
he's Chuck Berry. But
Yeah,
in the background, I saw this guy riffing on guitar. And then I
yeah,
began looking at him more and like looking into him more. And I
yeah,
realized,
yeah.
wait a minute, he is key. He's like the glue.
He's the because his rhythm playing. He's probably the best rhythm guitar player
Oh,
in
hands
rock history.
down.
As
Yeah.
far as concerned. And the songwriter and the solid rhythm section. Phil Rudd is a 20%. I got to charge it, but
Yeah.
uh, Phil Rudd, phenomenal,
Yeah.
phenomenal drummer.
Yep.
So ACDC was definitely out there, and they were doing their thing. So we got to put them in the mix. They
Yeah.
definitely influenced these guys.
Oh no, without a doubt.
Yeah, but let me just go back to Angel Witch for
Yeah.
the listeners who don't know much about this
Yep.
new British heavy metal.
Yep.
Iron Maiden, Tigers of Pantang, great band. John Sykes was in that band, who later
Mm,
on went to be in Whitesnake and
right.
all the success that they had. Diamond Head, probably one of my next to Maiden, one of my favorite new Wobbin bands. And the cool thing about Diamond Head, they inspired this little band in America called Metallica.
Don't forget.
You
Yeah, I
know,
smell that.
and and Metallica recorded "Helpless," "Am I Evil,"
Yeah.
and then that branched off to a whole American new wave of American metal,
Yep.
which was going on. just a little quick blurb on that. So around 82, when this stuff was going on in England, it was going on in America, but smaller. But there were parts of America like California.
Hmm.
So you have Los Angeles where the glam metals were cooking up what they were doing.
Yep.
Motley Crue, Dokken,
Yeah.
Rat, all
Yeah.
playing the whiskey, the troubadour,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they were ready to become monsters.
And pause right here because that's really important. While I would call like the industrial poverty side in England's happening,
Yeah,
over here in America, before the glam scene, right, the glam metal scene,
yeah,
I think rock was in its I don't know if you would agree with this, its arena sellout, right?
exactly. It
Right.
needed something
It was
new.
huge bands like
Hmm.
Kiss,
Yeah,
Boston, uh,
Journey, REO
Journey.
Speedwagon,
Ooh,
Six.
and then also the blow up of prog rock bands like Pink Floyd,
Mhm.
Genesis, like these
Yeah,
arena rockers.
and it was the end of a lot of bands' careers
Yeah,
when this new Wobbin started. Um, you know, Deep Purple was over by
yep.
'76. They were
They
done
were done, and
after.
they're even to a certain extent Black Sabbath, I think. Well,
Yeah. Well, this is interesting. Sabbath officially broke up, I think, in 78, 70, probably 78. Never Say Die was the last album.
mhm.
So they were with Ozzy. Then they created something else, which could also be considered new Wobbin. The stuff they did with Dio and Ozzy solo stuff
Mhm.
came out right on the new Wobbin, side and the new wave of British heavy metal. They're not, I wouldn't consider that, but they were out there making great music when this stuff was going on.
Mhm.
So Purple, John Bonham dies in 1980. Zeppelin
Uh,
was over
they,
practically.
they were done. The Who also were kind of on their
Oh yeah, yeah.
they
Keith
were on
Moon
their
died
way
what?
out. Like they had
70.
such meteoric, meteor rise, and then at this point they were kind of, fizzing out a little bit.
Yeah, and that's why punk came out because they hated the arena rock. They hated the
It,
corporate
it
American.
was a response to them.
Yeah,
And just talking about punk, you had the punk scene in England, and you had the punk scene in places like New York City, like the Ramones,
CBGBs. Yeah, definitely. That's
CBGB, Talking Heads, which they were
tel-
rejecting.
yeah,
Was
television. Blondie.
Blondie.
All this. Like this. It's funny. It kind of like the new wave of American heavy metal. You had punk, American punk, starting out around the same time.
Yep. Yep.
Or and you had disco, which
quick 20 seconds about disco. Disco was
yeah,
at its height. It was
yeah,
huge. And again,
yeah,
no hate on disco. I think you
love
appreciate it.
disco.
I
You know,
love disco songs. Like I discovered
don't
disco
hate,
through my
don't
dad.
hate us for this metalheads, but when you're a bass player, you gotta
Oh,
study Cheek. You
oof,
gotta study Bernard Edwards. You gotta study Earth, Wind, and Fire because
bro,
it's
cheek. Like
incredible. Nile Rodgers guitar work. It's
disco
like
has its place, but going back to like the punks and eventually the metalheads were responding to this and I
yeah,
guess frustration and hate because it wasn't what the music they wanted to make, but it was what made money in the time.
yeah, yeah. And I think what is his name? Malcolm McLaren, the guy who discovered. Maybe I'm saying his last name wrong. The Sex Pistols, like just like Neil Kay put together the new wave of British heavy metal. He put the Sex Pistols together. He made that happen. You could say he created punk. He's like the father of punk. But so like let me so the other bands obviously Def Leppard
Yep.
and they were the most American sounding out of all these bands. A band called Raven, Zaxxon, Motorhead is considered new wave British heavy metal.
Mm.
I mean, like I consider him that, but like
Todo bien.
they were out playing very fast before anybody, and that's because the
Motorhead's
drummer.
another interesting one. We forgot to talk about Motorhead.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
they're
they're
interesting.
considered new wave. They're definitely new wave of British heavy metal. but
Right.
they were like famous already by the time that
Right.
like their first
That's what
album
I
came
noticed.
in '9, and they started the speed. Filthy Phil, the drummer, he took fucking speed, literally took speed, and he played fast. You know, Motorhead, Witchfinder, Samson is interesting because Samson is Bruce Dickinson's first band. So Maiden
Mhm.
and Samson, if you they did shows together, and they were probably Steve Harris was probably like, I like this guy,
Right.
and Dickinson definitely admits he liked Maiden,
Right.
and and then the other one is a band called Tank, who Fast Eddie Clark from Motorhead produced,
Right.
Praying Mantis, which was a lot like Wishbone Ash,
Right.
and an all girl group called Girl School, who was really good.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, and the one band that I left out, Venom.
Hmm.
Venom now, they're new wave of British heavy metal, and they started, in my opinion, black metal. They had a song called Black Metal. They didn't wear the makeup and everything, but they had an album called At War with Satan. So they were dabbling in the dark topics and all the
Right.
fucking crazy shit. And I always was a fan of Cronus, the singer and bass player. So they're a huge influential band on the black metal scene
Right. Right.
from from the New Albin. So there's so many different things that came out of that
Mhm.
scene, which made it huge. I'm trying to think. This is interesting. Alan Lewis from Sounds Magazine. He came up with the name New Wave of British Heavy Metal,
Hmm.
and then that was like on the front of Sounds Magazine cover, and that's how that came up. And the cool thing about Neil Kay, the bandwagon had the greatest sound system. That was another thing. He
Oh, there we
invested a
go.
lot of money in there. So when the young heavy metal kids went to go listen to music, they were listening to the best sound system
Right.
that was
Right.
out there. And then I think we talked about was it in 1979, 80, Saxon had gotten signed, and I'm trying to think the label that they were on. It was like my last name, Cariri Records,
Hmm.
and it said that they were signed in 1979, and Def Leppard was signed. So these are the two first bands to actually get signed to major labels from New Wabin, and then of course Iron Maiden got signed, and then
Right.
British Steel and Iron Maiden came out in the same year with those two other albums. So those were the four influential albums that
Right.
made heavy metal take off. So now, how did it get so popular? How did it get popular over here? To
I,
give me
I'll be
your
honest with
opinion.
you. So our time is running out because a time limit.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a good segue to part two.
Okay. And I got to charge my phone a
Yeah,
little bit.
how did it get popular, right? How did the new wave British heavy metal, first of all, which is so influential. I don't think people understand, like our viewers, or maybe they do, of how influential they would become. And a little thing called MTV is going to be introduced in the mix, and that's going to make some bands like rise to new levels of stardom. I don't think some of them were not
Oh,
ready for, some of them were like, it's set to
and,
stay.
and get to America, because a lot of these bands wanted to get over to America. Once you got to America, you know, that's where, a lot of the record labels were, and there was a big metal scene on the West Coast. We talked about you had the Bay Area, which is Metallica and Testament, and then you had like the LA scene, Motley Crue and Rat and Dot. And then you go to New York, you got bands like Anthrax,
Yeah.
they were heavy as shit. And then labels started to emerge in America. Megaforce, Metal Blade,
Mhm.
Combat. And then they were signing bands. And then from this whole movement that came out of England, it blew up in America. So I guess we'll talk part two about
We'll leave
that.
part two for like next episode.
Yes,
The
definitely.
the how the new wave of British heavy metal, exploded and got its, you know, rise on the music scene, which at one point, you know, There's a reason why they call it the new wave. There's a reason why it has its own name, the new wave of British heavy metal.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we'll talk that in the next episode. So
All
stay
right. All right. Later.